In the quiet town of Maplewood, the streets were usually calm, with a soft glow of streetlights illuminating the sidewalks. It was a typical Friday night, and the local convenience store, Maple Mart, was bustling with customers picking up snacks and drinks for the weekend. The store owner, Mr. Thompson, a middle-aged man with a friendly demeanor, was behind the counter, ringing up purchases and chatting with regulars. As the clock struck 10, the last few customers trickled out, and Mr. Thompson began to tidy up the store. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a masked figure rushed in, brandishing a weapon. The intruder shouted for Mr. Thompson to hand over the cash, and in a panic, the store owner complied. Within minutes, the thief fled, leaving Mr. Thompson shaken and terrified. Once the dust settled, Mr. Thompson quickly dialed 911, his hands trembling as he recounted the details of the robbery to the operator. "He was tall, wearing a black hoodie and a mask," he stammered, his voice filled with fear. "I couldn't see his face, but he was definitely a black man." The operator assured him that help was on the way, and within moments, police cars arrived, their sirens piercing the night air. As the officers entered the store, Mr. Thompson provided a description of the suspect, his anxiety palpable. The police, eager to catch the perpetrator, wasted no time. They began canvassing the neighborhood, focusing solely on black individuals, despite the lack of concrete evidence. The urgency of the situation clouded their judgment, leading them to make assumptions based solely on race. Meanwhile, Marcus, a young black man in his 20s, was walking home from his job at a nearby restaurant. He had just finished a long shift and was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. As he strolled down the street, he noticed the flashing lights of police cars and the commotion at Maple Mart. Curiosity piqued, he slowed his pace, wondering what had happened. Suddenly, he felt a firm grip on his arm. "Hey! You there!" an officer shouted, pulling him to a stop. Marcus turned to see two officers glaring at him, their expressions stern and accusatory. "What are you doing here?" one of them demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. "I'm just walking home from work," Marcus replied, confusion washing over him. "I live just down the street." The officers exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. "We received a report of a robbery, and you fit the description of the suspect," the second officer said, his tone harsh. "We need to ask you some questions." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was at work during the robbery," he insisted, trying to explain. But the officers were not interested in his alibi. They continued to question him aggressively, ignoring his protests and the fact that he was simply a bystander in the wrong place at the wrong time. As the interrogation continued, Marcus's heart raced. He could feel the weight of their assumptions pressing down on him, and he struggled to maintain his composure. "Please, you have to believe me," he pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm just trying to get home." But the officers were relentless. They handcuffed him and placed him in the back of their patrol car, dismissing his claims of innocence. The world outside the car window blurred as they drove him to the police station, and Marcus felt a wave of panic wash over him. How could this be happening? He was innocent, yet he was being treated like a criminal. As they arrived at the station, Marcus was taken inside, where he was subjected to further questioning. The officers continued to ignore his alibi, focusing instead on the vague description provided by Mr. Thompson. They seemed determined to make him fit the narrative they had created, one that was steeped in racial bias and prejudice. In the interrogation room, Marcus sat alone, his mind racing. He thought of his family, his friends, and the life he had built for himself. How could he prove his innocence when the system seemed stacked against him? The weight of the situation pressed heavily on his shoulders, and he felt a sense of hopelessness creeping in. Hours passed, and the investigation continued without any sign of justice. The police had overlooked crucial evidence that could have pointed to another suspect, a fact that would soon come to light. But for now, Marcus remained trapped in a nightmare, a victim of racial profiling that would leave a lasting impact on his life. As the hours dragged on, Marcus sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The sound of distant voices and the clatter of equipment echoed through the hallways, but he felt utterly isolated. The officers had left him alone, and he could only hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, each tick amplifying his anxiety. Finally, the door swung open, and two detectives entered, their expressions serious. "Marcus, we need to ask you a few more questions," one of them said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. The other stood behind him, arms crossed, watching intently. "Look, I've already told you everything," Marcus replied, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I was at work when the robbery happened. You can check with my boss." The detective leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "We're not here to discuss your alibi, Marcus. We're here to find out why you were in the area at the time of the robbery. You fit the description of the suspect, and that's enough for us to take you in." Marcus felt a surge of anger. "That's not fair. Just because I'm black and was walking home doesn't mean I'm a criminal. You're not even considering the evidence." The detective's expression hardened. "We're following leads, and right now, you're a person of interest. If you cooperate, it might help your case." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I want to cooperate, but you have to listen to me. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just a guy trying to get home after a long shift." The detectives exchanged glances, but their skepticism remained. They continued to press him with questions, trying to trip him up, but Marcus held firm. He recounted his evening, detailing his time at work, the people he had interacted with, and the exact time he had left the restaurant. Yet, the detectives seemed uninterested in the specifics, fixated instead on their preconceived notions. After what felt like an eternity, the detectives finally left the room, leaving Marcus alone once more. He leaned back in his chair, feeling defeated. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being treated unfairly simply because of the color of his skin. Meanwhile, outside the interrogation room, the officers continued their investigation. They reviewed the security footage from the convenience store, but their focus remained on Marcus. They had already made up their minds, and the evidence that could exonerate him was being overlooked. As the night wore on, the police received a tip from a local resident who had witnessed the robbery. The witness described a different suspect, a white man who had been seen fleeing the scene. However, instead of pursuing this new lead, the officers dismissed it, convinced that they were on the right track with Marcus. Hours turned into a long, sleepless night for Marcus. He was finally taken to a holding cell, where he sat in silence, grappling with the reality of his situation. He thought of his family, his friends, and the life he had built. How could this be happening to him? He had always been a law-abiding citizen, yet here he was, trapped in a nightmare fueled by racial bias. As dawn broke, the police finally decided to review the security footage from the store. It was a decision that would change everything. The video clearly showed the robbery, and as they watched, the officers realized that the suspect was not Marcus but a white man who had been wearing a similar hoodie. The realization hit them hard, and they scrambled to identify the real thief. The sun rose over Maplewood, casting a warm glow on the town that had been shrouded in tension and fear. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was charged with urgency as the detectives reviewed the security footage. The video played back in slow motion, and the officers leaned in, their eyes glued to the screen. As the footage revealed the true suspect, a tall white man with a distinct tattoo on his arm, the detectives exchanged shocked glances. "This isn't Marcus," one of them muttered, disbelief etched on his face. "We've made a huge mistake." Realizing the gravity of their error, the officers quickly mobilized. They dispatched a team to locate the real thief, who had already been identified by the witness. Meanwhile, Marcus remained in the holding cell, unaware of the developments unfolding outside. After what felt like an eternity, a sergeant entered the holding area, his expression serious but softened by a hint of regret. "Marcus, we need to talk," he said, his voice steady. "We've reviewed the security footage, and it appears there's been a mistake." Marcus's heart raced as he listened, hope flickering within him. "What do you mean? Am I going to be released?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The sergeant nodded, though his expression remained somber. "Yes, we've identified the real suspect. It's not you. You were wrongfully accused, and I'm sorry for the way you were treated during this investigation." Relief washed over Marcus like a wave, but it was quickly overshadowed by the anger and frustration that had built up during his time in custody. "You have no idea what I've been through," he said, his voice rising. "I was just walking home, and you treated me like a criminal. This is not right." The sergeant sighed, acknowledging the truth in Marcus's words. "I understand, and I can't change what happened. But we're going to make this right. You'll be released shortly, and we'll ensure that the real suspect is apprehended." As the sergeant left to finalize the paperwork for Marcus's release, he felt a mix of emotions swirling within him. He was grateful to be going home, but the experience had left deep scars. The fear, the humiliation, and the realization that he had been targeted solely because of his race weighed heavily on his heart. Moments later, the door to the holding cell opened, and Marcus was escorted out. He followed the sergeant through the station, passing by officers who had once looked at him with suspicion. Now, they avoided his gaze, their expressions a mix of guilt and shame. Marcus felt a sense of empowerment as he walked past them, knowing that he had been wronged but also that he was not defined by their prejudices. Finally, he stepped outside into the fresh morning air, the sun shining brightly above him. The world felt different now, as if he were seeing it through a new lens. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of freedom, but the weight of the experience lingered in his mind. As he made his way home, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. He knew that he wasn't the only one who had faced such treatment. Countless others had been victims of racial profiling and bias. He felt a growing determination to speak out, to share his story, and to advocate for change. Once home, Marcus sat on his bed, the familiar surroundings offering little comfort. He replayed the events of the past 24 hours in his mind, the fear and confusion still fresh. He picked up his phone and called his best friend, Jamal, who had always been a source of support. "Hey man, it's me," Marcus said, his voice shaky. "You won't believe what just happened." Jamal listened intently as Marcus recounted the ordeal, his heart heavy with anger and sadness for his friend. "This is messed up, Marcus. You shouldn't have had to go through that. We need to do something about it." "I know," Marcus replied, his resolve strengthening. "I want to share my story. I want people to understand what it's like to be treated this way just because of the color of my skin. It's not right, and it needs to change." Jamal agreed, and together they brainstormed ways to raise awareness about racial profiling and the injustices faced by people of color. They decided to organize a community meeting, inviting local leaders, activists, and residents to come together and discuss the issue. They wanted to create a platform for others to share their experiences and to advocate for change within the police department. Over the next few days, Marcus worked tirelessly to prepare for the meeting. He reached out to community organizations, gathered resources, and spread the word through social media. He wanted to ensure that the voices of those who had been silenced were heard loud and clear. On the night of the meeting, the community center was filled with people from all walks of life. Marcus stood at the front, his heart racing as he looked out at the crowd. He felt a mix of fear and determination, knowing that he was about to share his story with those who could help make a difference. As he began to speak, he felt the weight of his experience pouring out of him. He recounted the events of the robbery, the wrongful accusations, and the pain of being treated as a criminal. The room was silent, the audience hanging on his every word. He spoke passionately about the need for accountability and reform within the police department, urging everyone to stand together against racial profiling. After Marcus finished, the room erupted in applause. People began to share their own stories, recounting similar experiences of discrimination and bias. The atmosphere was charged with emotion, and a sense of solidarity filled the air. Together, they discussed ways to advocate for change, from community outreach programs to police training initiatives aimed at addressing racial bias. As the meeting came to a close, Marcus felt a sense of hope. He had turned his painful experience into a catalyst for change, and he knew that together they could make a difference. The energy in the room was palpable, and he could see the determination in the faces of those around him. They were ready to take action, to stand up against the injustices that had plagued their community for far too long.